Okay.
So now in this sunset period, we have four major crises that are very, very critical. First, the price of energy is going up dramatically on world markets as we move toward peak global oil production in the world. Food prices have doubled in the last year because so much of our food production relies on fossil fuels. As we reach peak oil production in the world, prices go up, inflation goes up, the global economy stalls, we have recession, and we have people who can't afford to put food on the table. Peak oil is when half the global oil production is used up. And when half the world's oil is used up, when you're in the top of that bell curve, that's the end of the oil era, because the prices are simply unaffordable for the second half of the oil. So when do we peak? The optimists, the International Energy Agency and others say, well, maybe we peak somewhere around 2025, 2030, 2035. On the other hand, in the last half a dozen years, some of the great geologists in the world, some of the world-class geologists, the best in the field, have been using more sophisticated computer models, and they've been looking at the oil and gas reserve figures, and their models now suggest that we will peak with oil production somewhere between 2010 and 2020. One of the world's great energy experts said we already peaked in 2005. Now, the North Sea peaked 3 years ago. Mexico, the fourth largest oil producer, peaks in 2010. Russia probably peaks around 2010. Now, in my book, The Hydrogen Economy, I spent a lot of time on this question of peak oil. I don't know who's right, the optimists or the pessimists, but it doesn't make any difference. That's a very small window. The second crisis related to the sunset of this energy regime is increasing political instability in the oil-producing countries, where we need to understand that 1 out of 3 civil wars in the world today, one-third of all the civil wars is occurring in the oil-producing countries. So if we think these countries are a hot spot today, imagine what it's going to be like in 2009, 10, 11, and 12, etc. Everybody wants the oil. The oil's getting more expensive. There's a dwindling supply, and we're going to see more military and political conflict in the oil-producing countries. And finally, there's the question of climate change. If we simply take the European Union targets for CO2 reduction, and the EU is the most aggressive in the world, even if we go with the EU targets and China and India and other countries don't want to do that, we could go up 6 degrees Celsius in this century, and this is a quote from the scientists, and the end of civilization as we know it. Let me say that what we need now is an economic plan that may be ambitious enough and may be powerful enough to address the enormity of peak oil and climate change. And so let me say that the great economic revolutions in history occur when humans change the way they organize the energy of the earth, number one. And then number two, when we change the way we communicate with each other to organize these new energy revolutions. In the early 20th century, the telegraph and telephone communication revolution converged with oil and the internal combustion engine to give us the second industrial revolution. Right now, we are in the sunset of that second industrial revolution. So the question is, how do we open the door to a third industrial revolution? We can now communicate peer-to-peer, one-to-one, one-to-many, many-to-many. I'm communicating with you right now over the internet. So this distributed communication revolution, that's the key word, distributed. This flat, distributed, open-source communication revolution is just now beginning to converge with a new distributed energy revolution. And the coming together distributed communication to organize distributed energy, that's going to give us a third industrial revolution. Distributed energies are found in the backyard. They're all over Italy. They're all over the world. The sun shines everywhere on the planet. The wind blows across the earth. If we live on the coast, we have ocean tides and waves. Underneath the ground, we all have thermal heat. We have small hydro with water. So these are distributed energies. They're literally found everywhere. So the European Union is committed to pillar one of the four pillars of the third industrial revolution, which is distributed renewable energy. Number one, we are going to renewable energies. They're distributed. The EU has made that commitment, 20% in renewables. Number two, we're going to buildings as positive power plants. Millions of buildings to collect that energy. And the first buildings as power plants are already up. They already exist. But then pillar three, how do we store this renewable energy? Because the sun isn't always shining, even in beautiful Italy, and the wind isn't always blowing, and you can have water tables down because of drought for hydroelectricity. So pillar three is we're going to introduce storage technologies, but the main storage carrier is going to be hydrogen. Hydrogen stores renewable energy the way digital stores media. Then pillar four. This is the last pillar. This is where that distributed communication revolution that I mentioned earlier connects with distributed renewable energy to create a third industrial revolution. We take the same technology that we use for the internet. It's identical. And we take the power grid of Italy and the EU and the world, and we turn it into an intergrid that acts just like the internet. So that when you and I and millions of others produce our own energy, just like we produce our own information now with our computers, we store our energy with hydrogen like we store our media with digital. And then with a smart, intelligent power grid, we share the surplus across Italy and Europe on an intergrid that acts like the internet. That's a third industrial revolution. Well, let me say I work with many of the leading power and utility companies in the world. I advise and consult them. Let me give you a business perspective, not an ideological perspective. I don't think nuclear power is going to be very significant in the future. And I think it's essentially a dead end and would be a very, very poor course of action for any government. Let me give you the reasons. We don't emit CO2, nuclear power, so shouldn't we be part of the solution for climate change? All right? Now, let's look at the numbers. There are 439 nuclear power plants in the world today. That's all there is. They make up 5% of the energy that we create. That's all. These nuclear power plants are very old. They're grandfathering out. They're going to be decommissioned. Does anyone in Italy or in the world really believe that we're even going to replace the existing 439 power plants in the next 20 years? But even if we did, that still gets us back to 5% of the energy. It will have no impact on climate change. It's very well considered that if we want to impact climate change, nuclear would have to take up 20% of the energy to have any impact on climate change, just like renewables. But in order for nuclear power to be responsible for 20% of the energy, we'd have to put under construction 3 nuclear power plants every 30 days for the next 60 years. Did you hear that? That's 2,000 power plants. 3 new ones every 30 days for 60 years. We still don't know how to get rid of nuclear waste. We are 60 years into nuclear power. The industry told us 60 years ago, build the power plants, then give us enough time. We'll figure out how to transport and dispose of the nuclear waste. 60 years later, this industry is saying, trust us again, we can do it, but they still don't know how to get rid of the nuclear waste. The International Atomic Energy Commission says we face potential uranium deficits between 2025 and 2035 just with the existing 439 power plants that make up only 5% of the energy. We could take the uranium we have and recycle it to plutonium, but then we have the threat of nuclear terrorism. Do we really want plutonium all over the world in an age of potential terrorist attacks? I think that's insane. Then finally, and this is what all the people that watch this should discuss with their neighbors. We don't have the water. This is something the utility companies know, but the public doesn't know. Take France. France is the quintessential nuclear power company. Over 70% of their electricity comes from nuclear power plants. Here's what the public does not know. 40% of all the water consumed in France last year went to cooling the nuclear reactors for the nuclear industry. 40% of all the water in France. You recall 3 years ago when all the elderly people died in France during the summer because the air conditioning, they didn't have it? What you don't know is there wasn't enough water at that point to cool the nuclear reactors, so the nuclear reactors had to move down the amount of electricity they were putting out. So where is Italy or any other country going to find the water if France doesn't even have it? So what we need to do is democratize energy. The third industrial revolution, this distributed revolution, is power to the people. And for a generation that grew up on the internet, this is the conclusion and the completion of that revolution. Just like we can now rely on things like this internet. We're sitting here talking on the internet to each other, and you're going to have hundreds of thousands of people on the internet, and it's all free, and they don't have to rely on some centralized television network, and it's all open source, and you're sharing this, correct? Why can't we do that with energy? Italy is the Saudi Arabia of renewable energy. There's so much distributed renewable energy in your country. It frustrates me when I come to your country and I see that it's not moving like Spain is moving. For example, Spain is moving aggressively into renewable energy across the regions. For example, you have sun. You have so much sun from Rome to Bari. You have sun. You are a peninsula. You have wind coming in all the time. You have the ocean waves surrounding you on all sides. You have rich geothermal deposits in Tuscany. You have forestry wastes up in Bolzano in northern Italy. You have snow for hydro from the Alps. You just are overflowing with renewable energy possibilities. You're not using it. I don't understand why. I guess the bottom line here is what I would say to the Italian government is, what's your game plan? If your only game plan is to stay in the old energies, then Italy will not be competitive and will not get the economic multiplier effect of moving into the door to a new economic revolution, and will fall further and further behind other countries as we proceed into the 21st century. But if Italy decides that it's important to move into the sunrise energies and industries of a third industrial revolution, the opportunities are enormous for Italy and enormous for the citizens of Italy. I've been keeping in touch with what you've been doing with this website and on the internet now for a number of years, and I wish we had some more voices like him in other countries that would allow. He allows a forum so many people can become engaged, and it's instructive of where we need to go.